Howdy, folks. Welcome to TwoX Labs Podcast. I want to start by introducing you, our audience, to, Nikki's heard me gush before. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Prause. Can you share a little bit about your background as a neuroscientist and your work researching the Manosphere and NoFap hate groups? We're gonna get in deep today, y'all. Hold on to your hats.
So I have a PhD in clinical science, which some folks don't know what that is. It's a combination research and clinical practice degree. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I have seen patients. I saw a lot of them over COVID. And most of the kinds of research we do is doing investigations of treatments. So people make treatment claims. We try and see if those are true, or we design treatments ourselves and test our own treatments and see if other people think what we found is real. Think about mechanisms. So all that kind of stuff can be in the purview of what we do. And as a clinical scientist, you can specialize in different areas. You can do it all kinds of different ways. In my case, I specialize in neuroscience and statistics. So that means I spend a lot of time programming, looking at numbers, but also thinking about the brain. So do a lot of my work when we're doing the neuroscience work looks like electrical engineering, because, EEG brainwaves, that's there's a lot of Fourier transforms and time-dependent averaging. So a lot of denoising, if people are familiar with that. So I love it, but most people don't. That's fine. You do you. That's
See,
why
I'm like, this sounds amazing. I want to do that.
So we use that to investigate all kinds of things. And part of the interest in the Manosphere was these groups that started claiming they could cure erectile dysfunction, that you needed to be porn abstinence, that pornography addiction was real. And it really went against all of what we knew about how these mechanisms should work. And there were millions of guys following these groups, but no one had really tested some of their claims. And there are all kinds of scales of this, right? You can look at testing their mechanisms. You can do direct clinical trials if you want. And so there's no way of just like testing all the things. And so research in this space, we've kind of taken pieces of what seems to be most important about their claims and tried to look at their clinical impact on people who are following them, or impressions on social media.
And like you said, you can't test all the things. You can't look at every variable ever. So since these intersections exist, especially it sounds like primarily online. I know that they have lots of books that they have sold and things like that, but what really inspired you to explore these areas, particularly the Manosphere and the NoFap communities? What was your personal inspiration?
I had no interest originally, and then in 2013 we published my student Cameron Staley's doctoral dissertation, the first paper of two from it, where we happened to publish the first test of the neuroscience predictions of a pornography addiction model, and we found evidence against it. And I did not know when we published this in 2013 that would make a lot of people very angry. And we published a piece of that study in 2015. And I immediately started getting death threats. And that was despite that I was not first author on the paper, but I was the only woman of 6 authors on the paper. So it seemed pretty clear that I was gender targeted to me. And a number of the death threats were on the NoFap forums. And I knew a little bit, like I'd heard of them, but there are lots of these kind of coaching programs online, and didn't give it too much thought until it really spiraled up and you start seeing more of the clinical claims they were making. So then I go to read. I was like, why are these people wanting me dead? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And a lot of the beliefs were, there's no one who would ever say anything nice about pornography. She has to be porn funded. She's a porn scientist. Get her. And so there are lots of posts about the pornography industry being evil, and everyone in it is either stupid or in on it or Jewish, or like just all these kind of weird claims. And there had been a series of studies published on NoFap before me. They were all qualitative and some general observation. So I'm definitely not the first in that space, but none of them were good. Everyone who looked at them. kind of had impressions. Again, most of these are qualitative. They were looking at the content sometimes or interviewing people participating other times. And like one of the very first publications really highlighted a lot of the misogynist beliefs that underlie the community. And as we dug into it, we saw some of the things people were assuming, like they looked at news articles and parroted some of what the reporters had been told about how NoFap started that we found were not true. And so, okay, we're like, the history here is not accurate. Why is that? Like, what are they trying to get to here? And exactly, like, how do they exist in this atmosphere where there are lots of different groups? So the Manosphere broadly is defined as online groups of only or primarily males who disseminate anti-feminist beliefs. A few groups define it kind of like that. There are variations, of course, because, scientists, we argue.
It's our favorite thing.
Yeah. Most people, if they know a group in this space, it's usually the incels, short for involuntary celibate. And this is a group of mostly guys, although interestingly founded by a woman, I heard later, that
fascinating.
They're really ideologically driven, but believe they kind of got the short end of the stick in the mating market. And they have a whole host of language that's specific to their beliefs. And outside of the incels, there are groups like Men Going Their Own Way, often abbreviated MGTOW. And that's kind of like try and summarize it, kind of a response to initially men's rights groups in the 70s were looking for equality. So they would say, men get abused in domestic violence also. We want access to resources like women have. And if we're getting divorced, we don't want the judge to assume the children should be with the mother. We want to make a case for us having the children. Sounds reasonable. On the surface of it, they want their rights. So the MGTOW is more of a separatist movement. Screw those women. This is war. We're not gonna have anything to do with them. I'm sure people would make a more fine grade descriptions than that, but that's the overall gist. And then there are pickup artists, which folks may be familiar with from 20 years ago, and now NoFap and other groups. And the main thing that distinguishes all these other groups from incels, the incels are really ideologically driven, and these are all for profit. So they all look to make money by selling something. And pickup artists very well known for this, selling their courses, how to get laid, how to get this or that out of women, how to trick women, how to neg, how to etc.
Different kind of MLM.
Could be viewed that way. And your friends, there are only so many women. I don't know.
Somehow there's a pyramid. There's somewhere a pyramid. So you've been able to talk about and narrow down a lot of these communities and where these origins are. Can you talk about how this misogyny specifically manifests and why is it a core component of these groups?
Each one takes a little bit of a different flavor in why they hate women. And what's interesting about the NoFap group is they claim to be the opposite. We're saving women. So that's what we often call benevolent sexism. I know what is good for you. I know what's best for you. Let me tell you. And I'm going to save you. And the way that shows up a lot in the NoFap group is they largely are anti-masturbation, and then later on they added anti-porn, and they really demonize the pornography industry. So the women that are in it are either, whores, sluts, cunts, pardon my language, who are in on it and deserve to be killed, raped. They post all these kind of things. Or these poor women could only have been tricked because no woman in her right mind would do this. And let me save you, you poor thing. So the latter is really more like the benevolent sexism, and the former is more where we started getting interested in looking at violence posted in their forums and also false conspiracies around some of the jobs of being a pornography performer.
As you aptly described, different flavors of essentially the same thing. And as you've traced some of the origins of these different organizations, I kind of want to narrow in on NoFap specifically and how you kind of traced, if you read anything about Dr. Prause, uh, you trace the origins of NoFap back to bodybuilding.com forums.
Yeah.
We're talking the edges of the internet that most people have probably never been to. How have these origins shaped the culture and beliefs of this movement as it exists today?
So I think when researchers originally wrote about this, they looked at profiles of one of the co-founders, Alexander Rhodes, that was on New York Times and these different large outlets. And he said he worked at Google.com. He had a problem with pornography and ended up going to start NoFap to help save other men. That he was really in it to help people out. And depending when you read and what he posted, how the weather was like, I guess, I don't know. Sometimes he says it's not for profit. I make no money off this. In fact, I'm losing money. Other interviews he gives, he says, I'm a millionaire. I've made so much money off this. I have 40 people working for me. So I don't know what the truth is. It's hard to
How,
say.
how, I mean, it sounds as slippery as he needs it to be.
So I became curious about his claims. We have not been able to find evidence he worked for Google, but he was working for GamerKeys, his LLC, at the time, selling licenses to software companies, which he continued to do through the founding of NoFap. And that's what we're covering in part in our paper currently under review. It's like, this is a completely different start than we originally heard.
Yeah.
But then where did the idea come from, right? Like what actually underlied this, if not his own personal experience? And maybe he also had some experience with it, but the founding was strictly about masturbation. It had nothing to do with porn. That was all the initial posts. And if you looked at the kind of founding documents when they describe what is this going to be for, doesn't mention porn. That came much, much later. And so I looked, and they actually had in now removed posts that we got. Internet is forever, kids.
Hey, remember,
Yeah.
it doesn't go away. Somebody's got it.
So we have ways of recovering this, especially with Reddit forums. There are academic resources that archived early stages of Reddit also that have been really helpful in our research because we've been able to reconstruct things they tried to hide and would delete and then say they never existed. And so there's a lot of things that like were there and seem to disappear and come and go in our research. So anyone who wants to do work in this space, back up what you find because it will probably be gone later. We definitely have seen that and documented it in our paper. So in their first posts, they referred back to bodybuilding forums, and those forums now are also kind of not they're still in use, but they had a big website upgrade. And so the original forums, we had to like dig through and find finally the original post where this guy says, my girlfriend is gone for the week or weekend. She told me not to touch myself. I'm going crazy here. I have this many days left before she comes back. And the responses to that were varied. Some of them were, feel for you, man, stick in there. Others were, you should rape her when she gets back to teach her a lesson. Don't let her do you. Yeah. So that's how it was founded. They started calling this NoFap. They started doing a NoFap practice monthly. So NoFap November actually started on these bodybuilding forums. It was not a NoFap thing. It came from there. And they believed by abstaining from masturbation that it would increase their testosterone. It's a little funny because the opposite is true. That is, your titers actually increase a little when you are sexually active because the testosterone responds to the sexual activity. It's a little more complex. The titers don't just increase, but in general, you are not going to do your testosterone any favors by abstaining from orgasm for masturbation. And when they originally founded NoFap, they actually started, I think it was 62 subreddits around. They had one called No Schlick that was supposed to be directed at women, so like don't get wet. There was NoFap Christian. They also started NoFap Muslim, NoFap, like it was this whole thing. Some of them are quite funny. And so that ultimately, I think they had NoFap War, where they would like bring in armies. They would assign men to Army A or Army B, and the founder named himself Admiral, and the armies would war. And whoever masturbated, you had to say like, "Ah, I've died," and they'd mark your soldier dead. And so that was like the origins are very, violent, misogynist, like not
Yes.
remotely surprising that it might have evolved into what it ultimately did.
Mhm.
And the founder also, like some of the early posts, I haven't seen these from him in a long time, but they use, language like bitch, whore, a pussy is
Mhm.
a pussy, talking about like you should, if you can get it, who cares how much hair is on it? They're talking about like grooming habits. Just really
Mm.
kind of gross misogyny that's, I appreciate there are some cases that are borderline and depends how you interpret it. I would say these are not gray area. Those
No.
pretty overt.
Very,
Yeah.
very clear hate, very clear anger, resentment, and and the group doubling down together on these ideas.
Yeah, and I think that was really the start, and so a lot of those since have disappeared or people don't seem aware of them. So I
Mm.
don't know to what extent like that original idea translated. We also know in from their Twitter account, there are much better bot detectors for Twitter. The bot detectors for Reddit are quite poor. We don't know how many people are fake on Reddit, frankly. But
Mm.
their Twitter following, some of the algorithms estimated 39.9% of their followers were not real people. So
Mm.
it could be that most of their followers are not real, but we just don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's way too easy to fake on Reddit.
I mean that's as a avid Reddit user myself, can anecdotally confirm.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know what is a bot and what isn't. You just
Mhm.
never know. You assume bot until otherwise proven. So I really want to shift to how all of this history and what we know about this movement today, how does this connect to risk? So, how does the manosphere, including groups like NoFap, create direct or indirect risks for cis women and other marginalized groups?
I think there are some ways we could speculate about that. I don't have anything where they are directly citing NoFap in killing a woman or
Mm.
saying, on behalf of NoFap, I rape you, right? This would be kind of weird. So I don't think there's anything that direct. We have found there are a few folks who were followers in that space who were mass murderers. We have
Mm.
been able to confirm too, but again, like they don't cite NoFap. And so I don't know that we can say like it was due to that ideology. It may not have
Right.
helped to be in that kind of community, but we just don't know. There have also been a number of suicides linked to it.
Mm.
And so when we think about like what the effects may be, some of the ways they talk about women certainly is not great. Some of
Mm.
the violent posts have really directly incited or discussed committing violence against women who are in pornography, especially who are performers, who they see as complicit and trying to conspire against men to keep them weak so they can control them. That's kind of like the overarching
Mhm.
conspiracy theory in the group. And obviously, those are not good ways of thinking about being at war with women. We
Mhm.
would rather have the 1970s version of if you believe men got a raw shake, let's figure out how to work together and find some equal solutions.
Mhm.
And some of what we see also is these posters, and other folks have written about this. I haven't published in this space where they talk with female partners. Like, how do you interact if you're trying to follow NoFap with female
Mhm.
partners? And one perspective is they view it as absolutely appropriate to be shamed. So sometimes if their female partner like, oh, she told me I was a piece of shit and I know I am, she's right. Like that's a terrible thing to say. I hope she didn't call you that. Like that it's not appropriate to call partner names because they viewed pornography. It's not an addiction and you shouldn't be shamed in that way, but the community says you absolutely should. You are a piece of shit because you looked at it.
So
Some of
it's
the
doubling down of like this abusive narrative in several directions, whether
yeah,
it's abuse to women, but also abuse to themselves
yes,
by
absolutely.
maybe by partners, and that all
So
of this kind of violence is actually necessary.
Yeah, that it's appropriate. Like when we looked at the frequency of violent posts of different types and did content coding with this, we found unexpectedly that the most prominent form of violence posted in the forums was against other users. So they would say, if you masturbate, I have your IP address and I'm going to come cut your penis off. You didn't use the word penis. So ridiculous. And you could say, oh, it's the internet. That's how the internet is. But many of those posts, they'd follow up with, no, I'm serious. Like, here it is. I just sent it to you. And we compared their forum in NoFap to the forum's Porn Free, and then another forum that's supposed to be for help with folks who are struggling with use issues around alcohol. And they were about 100x in terms of the frequency of violent posts. So yeah, it's the internet. This stuff happens, and 4chan probably the best known for this kind of bad content. But there's something remarkable and different about NoFap that really seems to attract violent posts. And so I have not seen the kind of origin pop up again, where they're saying, if your woman happens to look at porn, beat her up, or if she asks you not to look at porn, rape her. I don't see that kind of thing. It's much more shame-based now. It's anytime, like if you have erectile variability, it's definitely because of the porn you looked at. Couldn't have anything to do with your partner or communication with your partner. And a lot of the guys struggle communicating with each other. How should I tell her? Because there's this accounting, like you have to tell your partner every time you view. I was like, I don't think that's a good idea, guys. Like there's, especially when you have that kind of mindset around, what I'm doing is horrible and is abusive to my partner. But the women who were in it should be killed and raped. And so maybe that's kind of where it got redirected. But it's a very weird kind of rationale of how men should exist with women. There's some of them also had talked about using women as a test for their penis. So like one of the main reason guys talk about being on this treatment, I don't consider it treatment, is they say, I want to improve my erections. I think I have erectile dysfunction. And so they'll come and like post this victory sometimes saying, I got it in her and it stayed hard. I was like, in who? Did you tell her you were like just using her to test out your penis? Like that seems like something, you should have a partner you're communicating with about that and not kind of quietly doing your psychological experiments to test out if your intervention's working. So some of
the violence part that you've been talking about, and that like the doing this research, it actually like logically makes sense. They would feel that they had the ability to use a partner as a essentially like a test receptacle.
Yeah, I mean that was the very first paper by Taylor and colleague on NoFap talked more about this issue of real sex that they talk about a lot on NoFap. So real sex is only putting your penis in the vagina of a female-born woman. Like it has to meet these things. Otherwise, it does not count and is bad for you. So they have all kinds of rules about, how they're allowed to have sex. There are constant posts about, is this a relapse? Is my wet dream a relapse? I thought about porn I saw 5 years ago. I just remembered a scene. Is that a relapse? I had a fantasy. Is that a relapse? Like, there's just a lot of shaming. But I think some of the things Taylor originally wrote about is problematic for women because of that idea. Like we are here to test our masculinity on women. Has our intervention worked to make us men? Well, let's find out. And here, be my test subject for my penis. So, not a great setup or interaction with a partner, I would argue.
Well, and if the partner is aware in any way of this idea of addiction or porn is bad and you should never, and they're roped in to any part of this, the partner is likely to feel like they have to be of service, that they have to. There, I would imagine there's that undercurrent of coercion.
Yeah, I'm really curious about those dynamics, and I haven't seen anyone publish a paper yet on the partners of people following NoFap. I have seen papers on partners of people who are identifying as a pornography addict, and those are really
Mm,
interesting communities. And I think they share some of these things where they view pornography as cheating, and that's a very much a moral value. Science doesn't really have a position on that. It's what your relationship agreement is. And when you view it that way, they then conceptualize the pornography viewing as traumatic. So they'll
mm-hmm,
have trauma recovery groups for wives of sex and porn addicts. And
mm-hmm,
the very few couple of papers that have come out about them similarly have seemed just universally negative. That is,
mm-hmm,
framing this sexual behavior as something that is addictive and traumatic and violating really seems to do more harm than good
mm-hmm.
for clinical outcomes.
Clinically, I can uh, echo all of that because I've worked with couples who have come to me after they have been in this uh, porn addiction cycle, that
Mm-hmm.
they've gone to these groups and they still feel broken and use the trauma language. And so it's a significant, I would say every couple that I've ever worked with, I, it's a year to really break down some of these patterns that they've built between them and the dynamics and how it's impacting them and their relationship and creating a sexual relationship that both people are uh, satisfied with.
Mm-hmm.
The shame is so powerful. I just think that it, there's there's no way in my mind, and this is of course, not any research I've done by any means, but like there's no way in my mind that the partner of a person who's in a NoFap group wouldn't be dealing with something similar.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. You see these guys posting, and this is a great research idea, by the way. If anyone sees this, you should definitely do this.
There's
But
dissertation ideas.
because you do see people saying, I disclosed to my partner and they seem nonplussed by it. And I found that very upsetting because I'm upset by my viewing. Why isn't she? I'm like, oh my God, please don't do this. Like, you can just see as a sex therapist, like, these kind of things, like, are they trying to give themselves dysfunction? Like, please, somebody stop them. But like the NoFap website actually explicitly says, do not go to a sex therapist. And
Mm-hmm.
that's been on their website forever. Um, for those who may not know, like ASECT is people who are specially certified in sexual issues and especially qualified to treat these kind of issues.
Mm-hmm.
They said they don't understand their problems. And when a guy comes and says, I saw a therapist, and they kind of challenge my conceptualization of my problem, that it may not be pornography, it could be my communication with my partner. Other people in the forums will say, get a new therapist, leave them.
Yeah.
We know better than that fake.
Yeah.
They're really aggressive about, I know better. Who are those people? License means nothing. So they're very anti-intellectual,
Mm-hmm.
very anti-science, which is funny. They claim to be pro-science. There's like, if you do research on their forums, they say, if you take content from here and publish it in a paper, we'll sue you. And that was on their website a long time. There's no basis for that, and people have done exactly that work. But they're very antagonistic to challenges to their way of thinking about how these things are.
It's the to remain in the group. This is where it sounds the on the culty side of things. To remain in the group, you must continue to
Yeah,
suffer with the group.
it's interesting. Like, people have asked me before, like, is it a cult? And eventually I got curious. I was like, how do people define cult? Like, what is the boundary of that right now? It's not really a scientific term. Scientists don't really use that language. So I didn't find a super satisfying example, but one thing I thought was interesting, someone who studied a fair amount said people often think of cults as like a group you can't leave, that you get in and they don't allow you out. I said it's actually the opposite. That is, you get into it and they tell you can go anytime. You
Mm-hmm.
never have to be here. You're free. But
Mm-hmm.
they model language that's specific to their group to where you start to feel identified and no one else understands you. And so
Yes.
I don't know if they qualify, but I have thought about it and I haven't reached any great conclusion.
Well, and the threats of violence to others. It doesn't mean that even if they logically will think, oh well, they would never do that to me. That doesn't mean that the rest of your threat system won't think like, "Hmm,
Yeah,
maybe if I do leave, there is a threat to me or my partner or somebody else around me."
I would think I would worry as a female a lot more if you had kind of value sex positivity and sexual freedom, and maybe you're not working in pornography, but you've had more sexual experiences than some other people have, or you have interests in more broad sexual practices. If you have an interest in bondage and the domination, that's something they post about a fair amount as being terrible and part of the disorder they feel they have to break free from. That is something I think they would view you as a bad partner and would tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
the shame that you've done this to yourself. So my sense is most of the posters, and this is part of the challenge, most of them are very young and have not yet had partners.
Mm-hmm.
So on Reddit and on nofap.com, they allow users age 13 and up. We very commonly see users under that age, or at least that say they're under that age. So in our research, we're not allowed to study children without special protections. So we have to go through the posts, and as best we can, if they say they're underage, we have to take them out of the sample. And we
Mm-hmm.
have all kinds of checks to try and catch these things, but sometimes they misspell something, our search doesn't catch it. That always makes me nervous. So I'm always trying to catch those things. But I mean, these are largely kids, and they're posting on, when I get laid first time, I was like, oh God, you know, I have homework tomorrow. We have a test. I'm a junior in high school. I just
Mm.
started high school. My teacher said this. I was like, oh no, please don't get into this when you're that young.
Yeah.
But this is where I think a lot of boys in developing like have normal sexual anxieties. How is sex going to
Yes.
feel? Am I going to be good at it? Am I going to get mocked? Um, what is scary about it? Am I going to get a disease?
Mm-hmm.
All of the normal kind of fears of development. I think they search for stuff online. Do I have erectile
Yes.
dysfunction? And I'm like, no, you're 12. You tried to have sex really early. And
Yes.
completely unsurprisingly, maybe it didn't work like you thought. You do not have erectile dysfunction. But if you go on these
No.
forums, they will tell you you absolutely have erectile dysfunction. And they even post complete remission rates for sexual dysfunction. So they claim they can
Oof.
cure this. And they'll say, like, when they're asked directly, oh, we don't make cure claims. It's literally on their website right now. So
Yeah.
they've stated it in numerous interviews. Like, if youth find this, they are told what the supposed cure rates will be if they follow this practice. And there's no evidence to support those cure rates, to be clear. I've never seen any supportive data that say that's accurate. They claim to have conducted studies. I've never been able to find any published evidence for that. If someone's aware of them, please shoot me the study. I'd be happy to see some evidence in support of this.
Yeah.
But it's really just a worrisome way for boys to be introduced to sex.
Yes. Especially when they're capitalizing on that very understandable, useful fear of,
Absolutely.
am I going to be different? Am I going to be different than other people? So I wonder, I want to kind of shift to thinking about like the societal or relational vulnerabilities. Specifically for cis women, do these groups exploit, and how does uh the these exploitations of relational vulnerabilities and societal vulnerabilities, how can that impact women's safety and well-being?
I'm most worried about women who are either in the pornography industry or who these men perceive as similar to
Yeah.
performers in the pornography industry due to greater sexual experience or something along those lines. They, uh, They claim not to be a religious group, and largely they're not. Like when we have surveyed them, most people do claim lower religiosity out of these groups. And so they really, one of the strongest predictors of identifying as an addict in this group is narcissism. And
Mm,
that's been replicated by another lab in a larger sample that wasn't just NoFap. So this seems to be like kind of a new finding in the porn addiction space. And one thing narcissism can do is, I'm perfect, I'm right, I know what's going on. So if something in
mm,
my life isn't going right, someone did it to me.
mhm.
Why did you do this to me? Stop it.
And that is integral to identity within
It's part
narcissism.
of, yeah, like how they think about their sexuality. And so if, this woman has more experience and may say, hey, if we thought about a vibrator, well, number one, vibrator is way off the chart for them because, that's not penis and vagina sex. They generally discourage that kind of sex toy use. But then it's like, how far have you gotten around? How many partners have you had that you're using a vibrator? My God. So
Mhm.
that would be my
Turn
concern.
that shame right around.
Yeah, like if they're not actually involved in the industry, I would be very, very worried if someone had actually been in a sex work industry or performing in pornography, OnlyFans kind of things, and got with this
Mhm,
partner. I would be very fearful for their safety because they are very overtly violent in their posts about women who've been in the industry. But I could imagine that's something that's likely to generalize. That is, if they perceive you as someone who, you know,
mhm,
supports that, or God forbid you think porn is okay, even if you don't
mhm.
advocate or say like we should watch this together, just saying like maybe it's not the worst thing, probably okay for most people. I imagine that would be a huge problem for a relationship where a woman is saying, it's not a terrible thing. That's some of what I saw. I don't advocate for porn, but man, they're convinced that I do. It's like it's just a thing. It's a media. We study positive and negative effects, and there are some negative. Um, but they really just have this thing like you cannot disagree with them on any level at any point, or you're against them and we will take you down. Based on those kind of experiences, I think if a woman said, I'm kind of okay with porn, I don't think it's causing your issue. Best of luck with these guys. I don't think you're going to make much headway.
Well, and it sounds even though we can't quite directly make the tie,
Mhm.
the likelihood of physical or emotional abuse risk in these scenarios, I would imagine, could be really high.
Yeah, I think they see it as justified. Whether they act
Mhm,
on it is the second question. So there have been a few studies, not many in the space, looking at connections between violent posts online and real life
mhm,
violence. There are a whole series of studies looking at behavioral intention, and those are positively correlated. People express an intent to act in a violent way when they make violent posts. But the actual follow through, those behaviors are relatively low base rate. So
mhm,
um, that is folks who actually act out in like a physically assaultive way with their partner are, I shouldn't, they're not tiny, but they're
mhm,
relatively less common in the whole population. So that is, if you look across men, most men are not punching their partners or engaging in that way. So I think, trying to predict what of guys who've actually made those kind of posts online in these forums would
mhm.
actually act aggressively against a woman. I don't know. I think verbally, I'd be shocked if they didn't. I mean, if they're that
Yeah.
open and posting it online, it seems like another private space where they would be engaging in those kind of behaviors. But yeah, it's just, I got my penis working. I did this for you. I did this because I'm a great man, and they really view
Mhm,
themselves as superior, and they talk about that a lot. We're the chosen people. There's that old army mentality is still around. They talk about themselves as soldiers, and it's we're winning. We figured it out, the secret. Everyone else is screwing up. They have kind of diminutive names, for
mhm.
gooners and other folks that they see as lesser than them because they're masturbating or they're viewing pornography. And so I imagine that's something that would spread into their relationships with, relating to this kind of content or people they perceive to not buy into their chosen narrative.
I can hear the elements of power and control. I can hear and there's no way at minimum that the misogyny and the power and control elements don't bleed into their romantic relationships. And even like it sounds like this would be again, I'm surmising here how this wouldn't impact friendships in real life with other men.
Mhm.
I don't know how it couldn't.
It's fascinating. They really have kind of a preacher mentality of proselytizing to other, or excuse me, proselytizing. So they'll write about, I went and I talked to my boys last week. I went to my male friends and I told them, I let them know, I warned them. Oh, that sounds like a really risky thing because it's also usually in a
Mhm.
schoolyard because they're
Yeah.
children. They say, "Oh, nobody believed me and they made fun of me, but I'm here. I'm representing." Okay,
All right.
but we should say like there's some uh, possibility of a different relationship happening also for these men who have relationships with women. Like I, it's not that I don't think any of these men are suffering, and
Mm,
part of what we discovered is a lot of these folks have a lot of symptoms of depression, to a lesser
yeah.
extent anxiety, but really prominent depression. And I suspect a lot of these folks are attributing their symptoms to pornography viewing that are actually due to major depressive disorder. And we're just
Yeah.
collecting some data right now on that. But if that's the case, and you're involved with a partner and you feel terrible, you're depressed, you're down, we know very well tons of studies on the interaction when one of the partners in a romantic relationship is depressed. And it's like you want to be supportive, but what if they're off on this weirdo, I'll say it, weirdo
Yes.
um, intervention where they have been
Mhm.
encouraged to make this false attribution and changing their viewing of pornography is not going to have any effect on their
Right.
depression. They need proper treatment and some intervention,
Yes.
minimally a book that's about depression, not porn. And
Mhm.
so, just to the extent you may have a partner who's really struggling with something real, and having them misguided and on this idea that they just need to stop watching porn and everything will be fine. Not a great mindset and unlikely to work.
Well, and it becomes such a barrier, especially if they're advocating for not getting help, that the only help is them.
Yes.
It becomes such a barrier for them to actually get care. And this segues uh, beautifully to like how therapists can start to think about
Mhm.
this. Many therapists are likely to encounter clients who are influenced by these ideologies, even in I would imagine even small ways, whether it's directly, indirectly.
Yeah.
So, what do you think should therapists know about the psychological impact of being exposed or participating in these groups? I mean, we already just named one, the barriers to getting care for an actual mental health disorder.
My sense is there's some good evidence for at least two approaches if these folks come to you for therapy. There's a long history of research finding folks who believe they have a problem with pornography often having more of a values conflict. This is work by Joshua Grubbs and others who identify a moral conflict as more of a problem, and that might be better addressed by education. Where do you get your sex ed from? How did you grow up?
Mhm.
What kind of things were you taught about this? And really working through with them why they feel their viewing is abnormal, if it truly is in a normal range and not problematic, more just distressing to them.
Mhm.
If they've had that experience and they really are centered on pornography, there's acceptance and commitment therapy that has a couple of smaller trials. They're not huge, they don't have long-term follow-up, but they
Mm.
have reasonable data and replication, and the manuals are available for free. So if you're ACT trained, you can pick up this manual and do it.
Do
And
it.
very good way. The manual does not focus on abstinence. It's not a goal. All it is talking
Mhm.
about your values around pornography and how to bring your behavior in line with your values, whatever those
Yes.
are, and helping you figure out what those are. The
Mhm.
second intervention is they're very, very likely to have an underlying major depressive disorder, I think. I don't think you can actually separate these out. That is there, of course, are a number of different disorders that have various hypersexual behaviors associated with them. Possibly the best known would be bipolar mania, where people often have a lot of sexual partners or can become sexually focused during that period. Hopefully, we're all doing good assessments, and making sure that's not what the underlying issue is. But I think broadly, a lot of folks say, like, well, yeah, I feel better for that brief time that I'm masturbating and happen to be viewing pornography. And
Mhm.
oh my goodness, that's terrible, this thing that porn has done to you. I was like, wait, 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 listen to what they just
Hold
said.
on. Right.
Right. This is emotion regulation, and that's a normal
Mhm.
part of depression management. And if you
Yes.
instead turn this and focus on porn, they can be abstinent all day and they won't be any better. And then they'll relapse, have more shame, potentially worsen their depression. You could be making them worse quite easily.
Mhm.
So, my guess is there's a very high likelihood, if it's not just a moral conflict issue that could benefit from education or this ACT, is you're probably looking at depression and
Yeah.
would treat it like that.
And so I'm also hearing you encouraging therapists. I'm reading between the lines here to not get distracted by the porn
Yes.
and maybe
Yeah.
even their own. Like I think especially for, I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist. You have been doing this work for a very long time. The average therapist out there who has never gotten a real good sex education might very well be distracted by, when a
Mhm.
couple comes to them, the porn use. And I think what you're saying is mind your assessment skills and don't get distracted by the porn.
Yeah, and that's another very good example. If you are doing behavioral couples therapy or CBCT or
Mhm.
emotionally focused therapy, porn can absolutely be conceptualized as one of the issues without being the issue. It's almost definitely not
Yes.
the issue, but BCT has a framework for this. It's like, hey, we have a values difference on pornography. How are we going to compromise on this? What feels reasonable to me? What about you? Let's test this out. There are really good kind of systematic ways of evaluating what the role of porn is or is not in relationship to stress and helping to frame that in a couple's context more as a values conflict rather than evil porn. And the
Mhm.
therapist, immediately forgive yourself, because if you look for science on porn online right now, they're all religious websites, and they pay Google
Yep.
to up their ad. And if you're looking for actual science on this stuff, we are way buried down on Google Scholar. You will not find our
Mhm.
stuff. I always say these groups that are lobbying typically for age verification or to eliminate pornography on the internet, best of luck. And they are paying to have their science bumped way to the top of search results, summarized on pages that they don't tell you are actually funded by a church group, and say,
Mhm.
look at all this terrible science. It's terrible. So, for example, I commonly see people who think porn causes hypofrontality, like long-term brain changes. That has never been demonstrated, to be clear. Their
It's like
association
that
studies.
the book, what was the book? Your Brain on Porn?
Yeah, so I can go on about that. So
Mhm.
I finally wasted an afternoon, and actually looked through that stupid book because I finally got a free copy. I was like, "I'm not paying for this."
Mm.
Um,
No.
so it's way out of date now, of course, but it turns out, like, it had, like, 135-ish citations or something.
It did.
Most of them are not real, and they're, like, YouTube videos, religious blogs, so those are not
So
citations,
I
and then
really hope none of my colleagues from where I worked with did sex offender treatment listen to this, because I definitely felt very similar to you. I was not going to buy the damn thing, but I stole the prison's copy and I read it.
Thief.
I did. Yep, thief. And when I was looking at the back and I'm looking at the citations, I'm like, there's YouTube videos here. What? This isn't a
Yeah.
what?
Well,
What
right,
is
so, like,
this?
let's just strip that away and say, like, okay, it's not science, but they have all these testimonials, right? Some of them are
Mhm.
very passionate. None of them are cited. Normally, if you have testimonials, you still have to cite the source, and they didn't do that. So I did my best to try and find them online, and I looked literally for all of them. I put them all in a spreadsheet and did these elastic searches to try and see if I could get segments that were linked together, like by at least four
Uh-huh.
words. Almost none of them appear anywhere on the web. I found a few of them, like 10 that I looked at. I was like, yeah, they definitely took this from here. They were
Mhm.
all modified. Every one of them was edited. They did not say
Wow.
what they said online. Some of them actually removed like important components. One changed the gender, one changed the reported porn viewing time. So those, as far as I can tell, all fake. Like that book is not worth the paper it's printed on, and all the proceeds go to a religious group. So,
Mm.
you know,
Here we are.
that's yeah.
For as not that as for how not like and what you found that NoFap was really low in religiosity, they sure as heck have the same kind of rigidity of thinking that
Yes.
a lot of these religious groups do.
Yeah, my suspicion is that's the narcissism. It's really, I know the right way. I am righteous. You are not. Let me tell you how to be a good man. Oh yeah, that too.
So we've already been talking about like what a therapist could do and that there are actually modalities like ACT and like what was it, CB? You said cognitive
Yes.
behavioral
Couples therapy. Yeah, like
couples therapy. Got it.
yeah.
That therapists can actually like find some at least some concrete direction to try
Yeah.
to when they start to see some of this stuff in the room. But I wonder if uh, they start to hear some of the things that we're talking about in the room with a client, and they start to hear like, oh yeah, that sounds like it's influenced by some of these manosphere
Mhm.
ideologies. How should they approach these conversations? I'm sure with like tiptoeing, but what are your thoughts on that? How would you approach these conversations with these clients?
So we have less data, of course, on what to do in the instance that they're uh, presenting with this. So I think in general, good clinical skills, where being directly confrontational is usually not useful. It doesn't change behavior or attitudes. So saying, you idiot, that's not scientific. Don't you know that's made by this guy? And they're just selling stuff to you, and not a great way to do it. And my suspicion is like if you just keep in mind like kind of the two most likely things and can guide the conversation towards, it sounds like you're really struggling to get things done and you're really kind of sad day to day. Like you just have
Mm-hmm.
trouble getting motivated. You feel drained. That's what a lot of these, oh, it's the masturbation draining me. No, no, no. That's the depression. Probably.
It's the depression.
Yeah, they sound eerily similar.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of steer that, you can validate those things that they offer you that can guide away from the porn. So if they say, I masturbated so much, I feel drained. So, oh, it sounds like you're really struggling, feeling fatigued day to day. And that's a big part of why you're upset that you're not getting things done, but you feel like it's because you're tired.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Beautiful.
Whatever we can.
Beautiful.
Validate what you can, and try and guide them towards one of these two things. The one thing to kind of keep in mind is the International Center for Counterterrorism has identified NoFap as an extreme misogynist group, and there is a clinical paper about helping men exit this group and other kind of extreme violent men's groups if you encounter someone who has more radicalized views from that. So they may talk about, the women in pornography, not just like, I don't understand them. I don't agree with what they're doing. I wouldn't want my sister to do that. That's one thing. This is
Mm-hmm.
more the flavor. I wish someone would take care of them. Maybe I'll do it. That kind of talk.
Right.
But,
The violence
yeah.
escalation you're
So
identifying.
So they're just this early clinical paper talking about how you can access resources and frame the NoFap follower in that case as someone who's in a violent men's group, and
Mm-hmm.
use those kinds of resources and precautions. So being mindful, this is not the client you want to see late at night with no one else around. You find out they have these kind of perspectives. And again, like even though there were some mass murders from this group, most of these guys are not going to murder anyone ever.
Right.
Like
I
this is
mean, as far as mass murderers go, that percentage is real low generally.
yes, it's
As
very
much
low.
as much as the murder porn podcast would love us to think.
Yeah. So I don't think these are high risk clients necessarily, but they do get
Mm,
exposed to some of these ideas that are not great, that are worrisome. And people, clinicians have written about those kinds of concerns with these men's groups. It's like, do be aware that that could happen. And so if you feel like there's some safety issue there, there could be. And I don't know, like I've never seen data on them talking to, female identified versus male identified therapists. Maybe there's something there for modeling masculinity in a healthier way.
Mm.
Just speculating. I There is that flavor to be aware of, but I think the vast majority of these guys, it's guiding them towards these other two options. Part of that education is so if they're younger, there are a number of porn literacy programs that have been tested. The one out of Boston University is probably best tested. And they use these with youth to kind of help walk them through what the pornography industry actually is,
Mhm.
why women would choose to go into it and sometimes do of absolutely their own volition. Some of them
Mhm.
enjoy the work, some of them don't. Most of them aren't assaulted. Most of them aren't don't have a history of child sexual abuse. Most of them aren't using drugs. There are elevated rates of drug use, but that's the whole point of the education is it's balanced. They're like there are some things that are more frequent in that population of folks, we think, but for the most part, this is a job, and this is how much
Mhm.
they get paid typically, and so it's there can be those resources too if they're really young. Those are publicly available, they're free, and unfortunately, she's not doing work in that space. Emily Rothman, who wrote that intervention, isn't doing work in that space anymore, which is a shame. She's doing autism work more. Uh,
Mhm.
but just really good kind of balanced perspective on like, let's look at the gray area here. Because that's so much now, right? It's the bifurcation, it's the polarization. Porn is evil or porn is great. And the truth, as usual, is somewhere in between. And, for whom is that likely to be a problem? And why do people struggle? And what are the performers in it actually doing? What is their thought? So I really like kind of their uh, grounded approach to try and be balanced. It's not that I agree with every single thing that's in the intervention, but it's pretty good and it's a
Right.
reasonable start.
Yeah, and especially, I'll make sure that some of the resources we've talked about today are in the show notes and are accessible to the audience so
Mhm.
that they can find them. Because ultimately, like you said, a lot of these groups are paying a whole lot of money to make sure that their results are at the top of the Google.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to find this stuff that is actually good, uh, science-backed, evidence-based education for people.
Yeah,
I
that's a few folks have written about that issue. It's if you don't say porn is evil and always bad, like you will get threatened. I've had licensure complaints completely dismissed, but like completely false
Yeah.
licensure complaints filed to try and stop my research. Every time I give a talk to like someone's don't you
Mhm.
know, this about her? So if it feels like it's unbalanced, it's like, well, one group of researchers gets threats every time they publish, and the other one gets none because they're saying what those groups want to hear. So there's a unusual problem in publication bias here, and I absolutely know scholars who have stopped studying in the space because they got threatened.
Yeah.
So
And this is like the threat of violence is real. The threat of your livelihood is real. The threat of the people around you who you love and your own person is real.
mhm.
You and I could be here. I have like 25 more questions for you, but I really want to thank you for being here and having this eye-opening conversation with me. I as we wrap up, what is one takeaway? These therapists that are listening to us talk about this that you would like therapists to remember about the manosphere and its impact on their clients.
I think in general, the manosphere tends to be very antagonistic towards mental health services, but that doesn't mean that there's not some way to empathize and get them care if they're open to it. And that absolutely is probably going to influence their other views, about women and attitudes as they get exposed to something alternative. But it's part of it is just keeping them in the chair. And, even as I say it, I was like, oh, they're going to say, see, they're making money off of. I was like, calm down. Like, this is their job. That it's
Yep.
literally just like, have a conversation with me.
Mhm.
Let's see what's really going on for you. I want to be helpful. And they
Yeah.
often don't believe that. So I think there may be a lot more work in kind of getting treatment buy-in for those kind of guys. But there are points where I think you can be empathic and help them understand their difficulties in a way where you can be helpful to them.
Yeah. Dr. Prause, I'm a huge fan. I really appreciate your willingness to continue to do your work in spite of all of the threats and scariness that can come your way. Where can the listeners find your research and connect with your additional resources?
Sure. I have a website, liberoscenter.com, LIBEROS center, all one word, .com. And if you want any of my papers, I have a ResearchGate account. If you're not familiar with it, free to register, and you can just hit a request button. So if anything's behind a firewall, I'm happy to send it to you privately.
Heck yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all, thanks for listening all the way to the end. And if you would like a CEU, you gotta be a member. And this is well worth your time. I'm just saying. Nikki's rad. So thanks for sticking around with us. We will see you next time.